the panel.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And the applause is really due to you for staying until this hour. If you don't mind, we'll just have a conversation among ourselves, and if you all happen to hear it, it's good because we've already had an overload of information, some fascinating presentations all around, and like the MAD group said, we have hope. Many of us have already heard the interventions from this morning, some of the individual, I would say, experiences from around the Caribbean. But it's also important for us to see how that learning, not just from the international organizations, but also we can help ourselves, particularly in the Caribbean. Mr. Dumas has already been acknowledged as basically the founder or the person who brought Transparency International into Trinidad and Tobago, and therefore, by extension, into the Caribbean, since Trinidad and Tobago was the first chapter. And although he painted a picture of the last 60 years in Trinidad and Tobago, I think he ended up advertising the fact that he's an optimist, and therefore that there is hope for the future. So you are not more of an optimist than I am. I'm the eternal optimist. I even think that there will be a revival in West Indies cricket, so you can imagine. But in terms of Trinidad and Tobago's chapter having been formed, and you being instrumental in that, how do you actually see the future? Not just for Trinidad and Tobago, which you explained this morning, but in terms of the Caribbean working together. Jamaica is already a chapter. Guyana is the chapter in formation, in waiting, and Barbados is one of the new entities. How can that experience help the Caribbean?
Well, I am an optimist, but it doesn't necessarily extend to West Indies cricket. Yes, we win a match from time to time, but you have to have more consistency, and that we do not have. And perhaps it's the same thing with the issue of the fight against corruption. We have to have consistency, and we have to have backbone and staying power. I mentioned this morning, I spoke at some length about the problems of the small society. And the small society, as I pointed out, very, very different from the larger societies. Our friend from Norway talked about a high level of trust in Norway, even in politicians. Now think about, as Caribbean people, or those who are Caribbean people who are here, do we have a high level of trust in our politicians? And the answer would be absolutely not. It is not a question, it seems to me, of spending too much time on the politicians. The people have to act. We cannot spend time pointing fingers at others and saying that they didn't do this and they didn't do that, because the question is, what in God's name are you doing? Other than pointing fingers at others, saying that are you a part of this society or are you not a part of this society? If you are complaining about corruption, what in God's name are you doing about it? And here is where I have, in spite of all the pressures that were brought to bear on me, governmental and other, to drop my pursuit of having something from Transparency International in Trinidad and Tobago, and you'll be surprised at the levels from which such pressure came and the people involved. But I won't mention any names. I will leave that to my memoirs. We are still here. You stick to it. And we can, in the Caribbean, if we collaborate with one another, it's not only at the time of hurricanes, but in time of, in the pursuit of good governance, because that basically is what we're talking about. Good governance. These are all elements of good governance. And if we want good governance in the Caribbean, as a lot of people say they do, then we have to speak to one another, we have to learn from one another. We're not going to take every single aspect from one another, obviously, but we take those aspects that perhaps are peculiar to our society, which can help our society and move forward.
Thank you very much, sir. We also heard from Dr. Patrice Charles this morning in terms of the Jamaican experience. And Dr. Charles, you came to Transparency in Jamaica, the National Integrity Action Limited, about a year ago, already having a distinguished career. What is it that brought you to transparency, and what are you hoping to achieve through the NIE?
Trevor wouldn't take no for an answer. As you said, I'm the former CEO of the National Parenting Support Commission, so I was in the government sector. And prior to NIA, my knowledge of the work that they did was really being a watchdog for government legislature. To my surprise, within the year that I've been there, there's so much more. NIA is more about developing values and attitudes in families, working with the youth. They have a youth arm at the tertiary institutions called Integrity Action Movement, or IAM, and we're spreading across all the tertiary institutions in Jamaica. And very proud to say that we just graduated 120 integrity ambassadors, and we just signed a memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Education to establish integrity clubs in the high schools in Jamaica. There's so much community work that's doing with the new project that we have with USAID. And we were blessed with an award from USAID this year in the amount of $12 million US for a 3-year project combating corruption and building integrity in Jamaica, strengthening corruption. Did I just say strengthening corruption? Strengthening integrity in Jamaica. What a slip. And with that, we were able to take on 6 sub-awardees to facilitate their growth. So we have Youth Crime Watch of Jamaica, which is a youth group that works with the Integrity Ambassadors. We also have Women's Resource Center, which develops skills in females, but they also do it in men also. We work with volunteer groups, the Civil Society of Volunteers, Training of Trainers program, and also with Capri, which is a research-based organization. Most importantly, though, NIA works with the government sector and the judicial sector. So we're training our judges and our clerk of courts. We're working with the police. We just had a training program for the police, anti-corruption program for the police. And we continue to do that. Right now, the reason why Trevor isn't here is because he's doing, we're hosting the youth conference in Jamaica right now. And I think one of the major differences between NIA now versus NIA 5 years ago is that when we just started, we were more of an awareness-based type of organization. So we were pushing hard to be known in Jamaica. Now, what we've moved towards more of a social movement where we're growing in our membership. We're probably around 500 now, and working with organizations with similar mandates. So we work a lot with the churches. We work a lot with community-based organizations also, and also with other civil organizations.
And some of those programs, if you could elaborate on it a little bit for us. Are they volunteer programs? Do you have a big staff at NIA?
You would think that, right?
And what do the youth particularly contribute? That may be lessons for us.
That I contribute?
No, the youth.
Oh, the youth?
Yeah.
I think the youth section, the youth officer, and that project is one of the largest things that we do, programs that we do at NIA. Because I think, as I said earlier in my presentation, we have to fill the gap somewhere. and we have to start somewhere, and starting with the youth based on their current perceptions. What I didn't mention in my presentation was that something else that was in the OCG report was that they didn't have a good understanding of what integrity was and what corruption was. And so we're really working now to educate the youth on building integrity and speaking out. And some of the programs that we have, like I said, we're working to promote civics in school. And so we, again, through a memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Education, we printed some books on the national heroes, and we're actually working with the youth theater to promote plays that have an integrity, anti-corruption theme to it. What else are we doing with youth? There's just so much. And I did mention the integrity ambassadors. I mentioned our integrity action movement. We have our ALAC also, and we work with groups in Jamaica now. You know how it is in the Caribbean with the whole homophobia and everything, but at National Integrity Action, we can't say that we are standing up for what's right and speaking out against wrong if we don't believe that it's equality for all. So we work with every organization right now in Jamaica. The Group for Equality, we do it's called Legally Lit. So along with our ALAC group, we speak about different legislations and different issues in Jamaica. And these are all young people that are up at the university that just want a better understanding of how the system is supposed to work and what improvements can be made to the system. So.
Thank you. For those who may not be aware, the ALAC referred to is the Advisory and Legal Aid Center, which is an initiative of Transparency International to make such legal advice available to persons who want to report alleged acts of corruption or victimization, etc.
Something else I forgot to mention is that with working with the church groups, we have just sponsored a male mentorship program. We participated in the 10,000 Men March that took place in Jamaica. It was very successful, and out of that, they developed a male mentorship program. And so we're also working with them in the communities. NIA is also working with the National Parenting Support Commission. We sponsored them 2 years in a row. I think that's how Trevor found me, because he sponsored me before I came, and then I came over and he continued the sponsorship. And we truly believe that values and attitudes begin at home. And so with that said, Monday of this week, we just opened our first Integrity Park at the Hope Gardens Botanical Zoo in Jamaica. And that's really just to create a space where you can come, you can see positive messages, and inviting families in, students in from school so that they can see the animals. I mean, it's actually very beautiful. And it's a really nice place to sit down and have discussions that are along the lines of building integrity and values and attitudes in the family. So whatever it is that we're doing, we're encouraging that family unity for families to come in, have picnics, and enjoy.
Thank you very much indeed. And I will now introduce Dr. Troy Thomas, who is a lecturer at the University of Guyana and director of the undergraduate research program there. Dr. Thomas has just assumed the presidency of Transparency International Guyana Incorporated. And we are aware in the Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute of the many iterations that the TI Guyana have gone through and the problems you have encountered in actually establishing a group that can go on to be a chapter in formation and hopefully a chapter in its own right eventually. Would you like to share some of those challenges and what you are expecting now and hoping to get out of this conference today?
Well, sure. I hope that the eventually that you alluded to there in respect of becoming a full chapter is not necessarily eventually, but probably sooner than later. Well, it's actually Transparency Institute Guyana Incorporated. Got started in 2010, in no small part due to the initiative from the chapter here in Trinidad. And I'm aware that you would have been a big part of that. The guys in Guyana still speak admirably about the interaction that they would have had with you in particular. And every time I come to Trinidad, they tell me to, go look for you, talk to you. We had the forum on Venezuela in Florida recently, and they thought that you might have been there as well. So again, I was told to go look for you. I wasn't there at the beginning when the institute got started in Guyana, but I heard the message along the way. But when it got started, there was quite strong opposition from the government. And when I hear of the experiences of transparency chapters in other places in Guyana, we are probably a case study of what can go wrong. Just like you spoke about the suspicions about why you were starting that in Trinidad, there was that, but there was more of active engagement in trying to discredit the individuals who were involved. Articles in the newspaper talking about them and their character and so forth. I think the government wrote TI in Berlin to try and discredit the people who were starting the movement in Guyana. And that really started an adversarial relationship. So when I listen and I hear about engagement with government and partnering with governmental organizations, that's still, for us seem quite far off. Because when you have this basic kind of fighting against what you're trying to do, there isn't going to be a willingness to cooperate to get these kinds of things done. And our organization, therefore, I guess our fate was sealed in that regard. We became an organization that speak out, but not really able to do much more in terms of pushing the agenda from within or having that opportunity to collaborate. And that went on for quite a while. We had a change in government in 2015 after 23 years. So the party or the coalition that was in opposition is now in government, and they campaigned on an anti-corruption platform largely. And they were our friends. Now that they're in government, I don't think they're so much our friends anymore. And it's not as adversarial as it used to be, but we still feel like they turn off their earpiece when we start speaking. And I know that's something that should resonate in Trinidad, that allusion to taking out the hearing aid. So we still have that to deal with. Nevertheless, if I reflect on our experience, I have to talk about the resilience of the people involved in it. There was one individual who was president at the time. He lost a job opportunity because of his involvement with the Transparency Initiative. And the government said it explicitly. There was a company trying to establish in Guyana, and they wanted him to manage the affairs. And they said explicitly to the people that we can't give you a license with this guy running it. And that's been published in our newspaper and so forth. So the resilience of the people in Guyana to continue this movement is something that I admire. It actually gives me strength. I tend to think that I'm here in the good times. Good is still relative to what you know. But I don't feel at this point that we have that to deal with. What we need to do now is try to be a bit more strategic in forming those relationships that would allow us to influence the agenda in a more substantial way. The government is still paying lip service to transparency and accountability and so forth. But we're seeing breaches every day, breaches in procurement. We're getting into oil, which is the big thing now. And we still have not seen the contract with the oil company. They're supposed to start production in 2020. And there have been many calls for release of the contract, which should be a basic thing that citizens should be privy to, but that has not happened. And every excuse that they have put forward would have been dealt with adequately. One was a security conflict, security issues, and we must assume that has to be with the aggression from Venezuela. But if you look at the matter, the company has been out there offshore exploring for so long, nothing has happened. What would releasing a contract do? So that kind of thing doesn't hold weight. And this is the new government I'm talking about. This is not the old enemies. This is the old friend. So we still have these kinds of issues to deal with. Nonetheless, we have seen the government has made some steps in the direction that can be interpreted as trying to deal with corruption. They passed an act, the state asset recovery legislation, which would have been controversial as well. And our position was, well, this has an anti-corruption thrust. And we're hoping that the issues get worked out, but that's no reason for saying scrap this thing entirely. So that has been passed. The issue is that it seems like it appears that it's being used to target the opposition rather than to address the substantive issue itself. So these are some of the new concerns that are emerging in our sphere. I think what I would gather from this conference, I'm happy to hear of the experiences of the other chapters. And I would like to continue that discussion, continue that connection, and to learn from you or work with you on our issues to try to determine the best way forward. Now we're moving into, we want to go into the direction of collecting and providing data. We actually, early in the year, did some engagements with local government. We were funded by the British High Commission, and we were able to go to 4 regions out of 10. We developed an instrument to measure transparency, accountability, corruption at local government level. We administered it, and it has to, the data needs to be analyzed. That's my job, because that's my expertise, of course. But we also had discussions with the local government authorities in those regions. We had panel discussions which we recorded and wanted televised as a means of sensitizing the citizens about how local government is trying to achieve transparency and what role they can play in it. That's what the discussion focused on. Then we returned to have workshops that would have included both residents and individuals from local government to try and share and come up with an agenda. What is it that you want local government to do to demonstrate that it's being transparent and accountable? And in each area we went to, there is a list which will be compiled and published, and we want to try to get the council to sign on to it, to say, okay, this we're going to try to achieve for the citizens. So that's something, at least, we're able from that angle to perhaps influence something. And I should say that local government elections were held for the first time in about maybe 19 years or so in the country. I may have gotten that number of years incorrect, but it's somewhere in the vicinity. Only 2 years ago. That's after the new government came into the office. So we have the old challenges have kind of moved on, but we have other challenges emerging. So I'm happy to be able to benefit from the experience here. And perhaps when things, and not only when things get difficult, before that, maybe we can lean on your strength to try and increase the sound of our voice in our own country, provided that there is some bit of hearing, even if the hearing aid is out.
Thank you. And let me introduce Mr. Andy Armstrong, Barbados. Andy has been the former president of the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry, challenged some of the vote buying that goes on in Barbados, and is a founder member of the Integrity Group Barbados. And again, over the years, we have been engaging with Barbados, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, some of the other territories who, for various reasons, have been reluctant to be seen to be standing up, as others have said, when they stand up to form a transparency group. But Barbados is here now. So, and if you tell us a little bit about how that came about and what is the catalyst for you getting now and hoping to have a chapter in formation.
Well, thank you, Derek, and thank you, Trinidad, for inviting me to this conference. Beyond there extended an invitation, and I'm really pleased that I can be here. The Integrity Group Barbados, it's a voluntary, apolitical, open grouping of citizens from various sectors of the Barbados society, including the private sector, academia, the legal fraternity, civil society, and others. It also included the media at first, but we kind of agreed that there may be a conflict if we have media actually part of the organization, but we do have a good relationship with the media. And in fact, the guy who heads up our group, Anthony Shaw, is CEO of The Nation in Barbados. So he is able to give us a lot of opportunity to publish articles in the newspaper, which has been very helpful in raising the profile. I guess the catalyst for the group, step back a little bit to the 2013 general elections in Barbados, which it was widely acknowledged that there was widespread vote buying. In fact, on the night of the election, the Prime Minister and the Attorney General both came out and publicly said they were very upset and dismayed by the level of vote buying that had gone on in the election, and they would definitely do something to address that. Then they went very quiet on it, various speculation. I think the speculation, and I'm saying this is only the allegation, but people pointed out to them that their own party had been just as big a culprit as the opposition. But having said that, there was two other guys, Andrew Bino, another businessman, and Patrick Frost, a retired trade unionist. And the three of us were feeling strongly that this was an issue and we couldn't just let it die. So we did meet with some other people, and there was another 6 or so people who were, yes, go forward. We will support you, but we don't want our names to be called. So the three of us, went ahead, and we got quite a bit of publicity in the press, and we did get a quick response from a couple of senior cabinet ministers, and it was basically, well, the gentlemen are all well-intentioned but misguided and sanctimonious and don't know what they're talking about, and that's from the cabinet ministers. Every opportunity we had to talk to the Prime Minister in an open forum, he only had to see one of us stand up and he would say, okay, I know what you're going to ask, Mr. Armstrong. We still see vote buying as an issue, but it's part of a bigger thing. It's a big issue for the whole of the Organization of American States, and so Barbados isn't going to deal with it alone. We're going to try and have a unified approach to it. Now, then I would have to say eventually the three of us probably were about to give up. And then this is when we had the call from Anthony Shaw, and he said, look, let's try and make this a bit bigger. So that was the genesis for the Integrity Group Barbados, which was about October last year we started. And that has been able to grow. And we've made a linkage with another group called the Transparency Action Group, which is a Facebook social media based group, and they have about 1,000 followers on Facebook, and they have a much younger demographic than us. And they had they'd really taken up the Auditor General's report and done a lot to publicize the Auditor General's report, because the Auditor General in Barbados, we would say, has been very impartial and has really unearthed a lot of wrongdoings, but he has no power, I don't believe, to prosecute. And it's a general level of frustration in society that he keeps highlighting all these things and nobody seems to do anything about it. So that group and ours, we've kind of merged together, and we're trying to highlight the fact that all is not as good as people would want us to believe in Barbados. I should mention that Barbados still ranks very highly on the Corruption Perceptions Index. As recently as 2013, we ranked number 15 in the world, but we were higher than the United Kingdom and the United States of America. We've had a fairly precipitous drop. We dropped to number 31 last year, so that's a fairly major drop. And I think perhaps, unfortunately, more reflective of reality. So we hope to achieve to actually form a chapter of Transparency International in Barbados, which would be the Integrity Group Barbados and Transparency Action Group working together to form that. And really, eventually, we would like to get our ranking back up, so we would like to get back in the top 15, but to really deserve to be there. So.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, before I try to engage the panel in some of the common issues that we could foster greater cooperation among our chapters and chapters information, are there any questions from the floor for the panelists at this stage? We need a microphone, or?
Well, to begin, I would say in Guyana we're not as trusting as people are in Norway. And that's one of the issues. I think over time, and I've said this to the organization in Guyana, we have been a little bit too guarded, given what was going on. There was this onslaught. And we also know that the society was quite corrupt. I think because of that, the members of the organization felt uneasy about really partnering with people because it might come back to haunt them. And this is in a context where the government was on the offensive. And if they want to get at me, and I'm your friend, and they can get at me through you, they will do that. And I think it kind of created this environment where we really isolated ourselves. That is changing now. We're starting to collaborate with other organizations like the Guyana Human Rights Association. In fact, today I was invited to do a joint public presentation with that organization, but of course I'm here. There is another organization, Moray House Trust, and this one was initiated by them. They wrote us asking whether we wanted to collaborate because they do a lot of the public engagement sessions and they would like for us. So that is changing, but I must admit that up until maybe a year and a half ago, we were still very much isolated and often preferring to go it alone than to collaborate because of those issues because of those problems that we experienced.
I didn't. I have a question for the doctor. The Integrity Commission of Guyana, from my recollection, attended the CAIC-ACB, the Caribbean Association of Integrity Commissions and Anti-Corruption Bodies.
Are you hearing?
The meeting was held in Trinidad. I recall someone from Guyana attending. But at the last meeting held in Jamaica, no one represented Guyana. But it was announced that Guyana was restructuring their commission, and also that the Bahamas was about to form their own commission. We in the Caribbean body would welcome these new associations. So have you any information in respect of Guyana?
First, let me acknowledge that to say that we're restructuring is quite a euphemism. The reality is that there was no head of the Integrity Commission for a little while. The last person that was there, I think he passed on, and nobody was selected to replace that person. So I don't think it was a restructuring, is that nothing was done to fill the position that became vacant, and that's still the case now. So in effect, basically, there may be an office, but none of the people in the office will have the authority to do what the commissioner would have been able to do.
Yeah, I'd like to make a few comments on the Guyana situation. I succeeded Reggie Dumas as chair of TTTI, and thereafter he and I promoted the adoption of the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EITI, in Trinidad and Tobago. And we eventually joined that international organization, which is strongly supported by Transparency International itself. In fact, the first chair of the EITI internationally stepped down as chair of Transparency International to become chair of the EITI. The relationship was that close. And Hughet succeeded to become chair of Transparency International to replace that gentleman, Peter Eigen. So I'm saying that because Transparency Institute here promoted the EITI in Trinidad and Tobago, and we are now members of the EITI International. In fact, I serve on the EITI International board, even as I head the local EITI effort. In Guyana, through our efforts, Guyana last month applied to join the EITI International movement. And on the oversight committee is a member of the chapter information. So there is that nexus, as indeed with Trinidad, it was the TTTI promoting EITI. In Guyana, EITI I think should be able to help Guyana overcome the sort of problems that they're encountering now. So I feel that with the government strongly behind the Guyana EITI, Minister Trotman, for instance, the president as well, and with a member of the, TI Guyana serving on the EITI Oversight Committee, I can't see that the situation is at a stalemate. It seems to me as though it's moving in the right direction, and that if the government has embraced the EITI, I can't see them not embracing the Guyana TI chapter. So is it that you're getting negative reactions now, or are you talking about what happened a year and 18 months ago? Because on the face of it, it seems as though the situation in Guyana is moving in the right direction. So are there any current problems with the government, or are the problems you're speaking about all issues that probably have been laid to rest?
Well, most of what I spoke about would have been the problems of the past, because they would have been linked to mainly the previous government. This new government has been in place since 2015, so not very long since they've been there. And we have a better relationship with the current government than we had with the previous. The previous one, it was just adversarial. That's what it was. At the same time, I don't think that we're getting the kind of response we expected from the new government, given what they were promoting. So on the one hand, I agree that we're moving in the right direction, but at the same time, I'm sensing that there are some limitations to it. There are some limits on how far we can go. One good sign is that our last annual dinner, which was in March this year, one of the vice presidents delivered the keynote there. So we were never able to do something like that in the past. So indeed, we're getting some movement in the right direction. Indeed, perhaps we're a little bit too negative about it. We're probably still smarting from the experience and want to be guarded about it. And that's something we have to deal with. And I, as a member of the organization, I actually am pushing that. 2 years ago, you would not have heard members of the organization entertain collaborating with the government. Now they're more willing to entertain it. So we are recognizing that there is that change. However, I don't think much has come of it, or perhaps I'm expecting too much too soon, I don't know. But I don't think that enough has come out of whatever changes the new government would have inaugurated.
Could I just make one brief additional point? The EITI is a tripartite coalition between government, the extractive companies, and civil society. So government has to be part of that, and government has to apply internationally to join the EITI. With Transparency International, if the government isn't on board, I don't see that as a inhibiting factor, because as Reggie said, he went ahead, civil society in Trinidad and Tobago went ahead and did it without the government support.
Yeah.
So I don't see that in Guyana or Barbados for that matter, if the government is lukewarm, that should in any way prevent you from getting on with the job of seeking registration as a national chapter, and let them cooperate with you as and when the need arises. That's different from the EITI, because the government has to apply for membership of the EITI, but government doesn't have to apply for membership of Transparency International.
Thank you. We need to close off, unfortunately. Reggie, have you heard enough during the course of the day to fuel your optimism? And are there some particular areas that you would like to point out that we can collaborate as the Caribbean, the 4 chapters, if you like, that can enhance our work?
Well, I was optimistic before I came. And I think I said so in my remarks. If I were not optimistic, I wouldn't be here. I have to live in hope. If I give up hope, well, that's that. And as I said in my remarks, I'm pleased to see the expansion, at least in Trinidad and Tobago, of what I call the middle ground. That is, people more and more willing to speak out, more and more willing to think, and not automatically running after this political party or that political party. I mean, we still have that, of course, and we'll always have that. But the middle ground seems to be growing. And that is a very heartening thing. We have been talking about the difficulties, Barbados, Jamaica, Guyana, Trinidad, and Tobago, and there's one common thread. Why are governments so afraid of dealing with corruption? Is there a particular reason? They talk about it when they're in opposition, the parties, and how we are going to change this. Even when they're in government, they talk about it. That we are going to change this and change that and bring in legislation, which sometimes they do, and which they never implement. But they always seem to run away from this issue of corruption, having made pledges to do something about it. Which means that the people of the country have to take their action. You can't wait on the government to do anything, otherwise nothing will happen. If there is a sufficient body of persons, and I think there is in Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm sure there also is in the other three countries, if there is a sufficient body of persons that want to see change and are willing to see change and that have the courage to stand up to the inevitable pressures that will be brought to bear, then we can make progress. And I think we have to support one another in the Caribbean. We can't go on the basis simply that Trinidad and Tobago will do this, and Guyana and Jamaica will do that. Jamaica has been considerably helpful to Trinidad and Tobago in terms of the procurement legislation. For instance, in Trinidad and Tobago, there still hasn't been proclaimed. Fully at any rate, partly proclaimed, but not fully. But it was the Contractor General at the time from Jamaica, Christie, who was of considerable help to the group here that was preparing or helping prepare the legislation and the procedures, etc., for the thing, as Victor knows. So we have to help one another. We cannot assume that if we operate separately, to use the phrase that a late president of Guyana said, either we swim together or we sink separately. Although I didn't realize that he was too happy to swim together too much of the time. So we can help one another. We should help one another. We should help Barbados. Barbados can help us. Jamaica, Guyana. We have to help one another. The people have to take the action. It is no good relying on the government to take the action, because we know that political parties will promise and do nothing. We all know why they will do nothing. I don't have to go into the details. As for the EITI, as Victor knows, yes, we were pressing this. And when I was the chairman, before he became chairman, I remember going to a senior minister in the then administration here and talking about joining the EITI. Victor knows who I'm talking about, who refused. Why should Trinidad and Tobago join the EITI? We don't think we should join the EITI. And he turned it down flat. But you have to keep pressing. If you don't keep pressing, and in this case, of course, it had to be the government that, as Victor says, that took action. If you don't keep pressing, you're dead. Because, yes, they want votes. They will come to you and tell you all kinds of things every 5 years or whatever it is. Make all kinds of promises. Publish glossy manifestos promising, well, they don't promise the moon, but they promise almost other parts of the galaxy. They don't promise the moon. And we know by now that a lot of those promises are not going to be kept. We know by now that the bulk of the promises, no attempt even will be made to keep them. So it is up to us as the people to take action. We have a serious problem in terms of our institutions. The institutions that we have, they're formal institutions, of course, judiciary and public service and police service and this and that. But the institutions are not as strong as they ought to be. That is to a large extent our fault, because we have allowed the institutions over time to be attacked frequently, as I said in my remarks this morning, by the very people who are commissioned to guard the institutions. And we have been seeing this in recent times in Trinidad and Tobago. I don't need to mention any names or examples. In the United States, for instance, you have a president who was a curious fellow, who seems to be unhappy about institutions unless they revolve around himself. But the United States has strong institutions, and the people are pushing back. So that what he wishes to achieve, what he has obviously been wishing to achieve, he has not been able to achieve. In the small society, it is very different, because people can get at you more easily, as Dr. Thomas said. If he doesn't get at you, he gets at someone close to you, and so on, etc. And so you back off, and the institution is weakened, and the progress that you wanted to make is weakened. The Integrity Commission has come under attack, as Justice Hossain knows, in the not too distant past. So it is up to us to stand up. If we don't stand up, we are dead. And if we die, and we can still talk after death, it is no good complaining. Because we will have caused that ourselves.
Thank you, sir. Being aware that, sorry, we're running out of time, so I just want people to close up. Being aware that you have friends who will help, are you encouraged for Barbados?
Yeah, we're very encouraged. So we've already got some help from both Trevor Monroe in Jamaica, and from Dion and Emile was there too. Elias was there helping as well. So we've had a lot of encouragement from both Trinidad and Jamaica, and I guess that's given us the courage to go forward and form a chapter. And we recognize too that we're starting to make a small difference. Initially, people are telling you that, well, you're just wasting your time, that horse is long bolted. And now people are telling you, well, do you think you're doing any good? And when you engage them, at least they're starting to believe that maybe you are doing some good. So it's going to take a while, but I'm very encouraged that we will get there eventually.
Thank you very much. And I know enough about discussions to know that the lady must always have the last word.
Thank you. December 9th, we're going to be hosting our anti-corruption conference. And it would be great. I'm inviting everyone. Trevor doesn't know that, but I'm inviting everyone. And it would be great to connect our youth arm with the youth arm of the other countries. I think we're doing similar work, and it will be great for everyone to come together. I mean, to have that connection in the Caribbean can only strengthen the work that we're doing right now. And again, encouraging the youth to speak out and to do the right thing, I think, again, is something that we are all doing in a similar way. And so we've gone a far way with it in Jamaica. Like I said before, we do have an established youth arm at the universities, not just UWI, UTech, Edna Manley, even churches, Teachers College, we're training the teachers also to be a part of that. And again, we're we've graduated over 120 integrity ambassadors, and we're still training more. So we have ideas that I'm willing to share with the other chapters. And so looking forward to working with everyone.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you very much for the audience for your questions. And before Melissa switches off the microphone, thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.
Risk. That same point was made that most of the corruption taking place in countries is in respect of procurement. The question is, what can be done? And that is why I was very interested in listening to Mr. Al-Rawi. I'm sorry he is not here because of his commitments, but I was very impressed by the hard work that he's obviously done. And he indicated that 2 bits of legislation which may have some relevance to procurement, namely whistleblowing and the one relating to procurements themselves, they have not been passed as yet. Upon reflection of that, it seems to me, and I've given it some considerable thought, that we can take a lesson from the courts. Now, I say that because in court, any member of the public has a legal right to enter that courtroom and sit down and listen to the case that is taking place. He can do that as a matter of right. In fact, the media itself has a right to go in and to report what is taking place and to see how that judge is dispensing justice. They don't have to pay, they don't have to ask anybody, subject, of course, to accommodation. And it seems to me that that costs nothing. And if that freedom is given to the public to enter into the room where the procurement proceedings or processes are taking place, then I have a feeling, a strong feeling, that we'll see a marked drop or decline in corruption. Because most of the corruption, we are told, and we've heard it here today as well, that that is where it's taking place. So I say, open the doors and windows, please. What is the objection? What can be the possible objection to that? And I'm so happy that Mr. Dumas, who is one of your founders here, is here, and he can assess the value of this point. What prejudice does anyone suffer? Take, for example, a contract worth $5 million US, and you have a number of bidders. You have 5 or many bidders. The bidders can employ a lawyer to come and advance their case to see if they would get it, and the public can come in and see how the persons who are assessing those bids, how they are deciding the case, and any party can have a legal a counsel to advocate his entitlement, his client's case, and the matter will be done openly. You don't need legislation for that. Of course, one may object, well, this concerns some kind of large amounts of money or some kind of business which the public shouldn't know, save and except things like national security matters which may have to be dealt with in camera and so on. There can be no objection, in my respectful view, because what is being debated there is public money. It involves public money. And I drew an analogy with the Calypso, Jean and Dinah. Everybody inside here knows Jean and Dinah, the Calypso. I said, well, you know, Jean and Dinah, the mighty sparrow didn't tell us where they came from. And I made this up because I call it variations on Jean and Dinah. But I know where they come from. They come from Cocorit. Jean and Dinah living near each other. Jean had a common law man called Fitzy, was working in the docks. Fitzy went to work. When Fitzy came home tired, he expected his lunch on the table. But where was Jean? Jean was talking to Dinah down the road about everybody's business, and she didn't have it, so he put a good beating on her. And when he beat her, unfortunately, she took him to the magistrate's court. Well, everybody from Cocorit decided to go to the court, exercise their right to sit down and listen to what is happening and what the verdict will be. They have that legal right. So there's a constitutional lesson. What is it? The $5 million contract, US, which is their money too, they are kept out. But a simple matter like an assault and battery, they can walk in and they have a legal right. Is there sense in it? So please,
Thank you,
international transparency, please, I say, open the doors and windows so that everybody could see. People can hear, the newspapers can report it. That's the point I wish to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, and thank you again to the panel. Thank you very much indeed, everybody.
Okay,
Thank you.
We'll ask the panel to stay seated as we have our vote of thanks by our Vice Chair, Martin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Justice Hossain, TTTI will take up and move with that proposal you have made. I assure you, at the board level, we'll take it up, because I think it's worthwhile. My task here is very simple and very short. I am to give the vote of thanks, which I would like to do, except I can't find what Ariel just gave me. Oh, here it is. Yes, I would like to thank our specially invited guests, particularly our guests who flew in all the way from Norway and Sweden and Canada to join us, Gurus Vettelmark, Huguette Labelle, and those of our regional partners who came in, Andy Armstrong, Dr. Patrice Charles, who I want to talk about the integrity clubs, and Dr. Roy Thomas from Guyana. Thank you for coming and joining us. And of course, Mr. Dumas, Derek, Victor, the rest of the crew, and Frank for the anthem. Thank you very much. I want to thank our sponsors particularly who allowed us to host this conference today. Thank you very much to our conference. Thank you to our performers, our volunteers, to the Hilton, to the staff, directors, and to you who came to hear us today. I want you to give yourself a round of applause, those of you who came. Thank you very much. And last but not least, a central tradition of the Anti-Corruption Conference is the TTTI Declaration of Anti-Corruption. This year, we declare that corrupt practices must be acknowledged and those found guilty must be punished. We declare that after 60 years, as Reggie reminded us, of promises, we must start breaking the culture of corruption. We declare that effective anti-corruption legislation must be passed and enforced. We declare that there is no silver bullet to end corruption. We have to do the hard work. We declare that laws can change culture of corruption. We declare that together, by our small contribution, we can make a big difference. Come and join TTTI, come and join us in our fight. And we declare that we will take active steps to break free from a culture of corruption, to move towards zero tolerance of corrupt practices, where we can trust our public officials, as they do in Norway. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Reach home safely and avoid the landslips, avoid the hill, the lay down when you're going over. Listen to the news, so you don't go over the lay down. I'm sure. It had one this morning.